Google's really taken advantage of a lot of people, and I think that's a very serious thing, and it's a very serious charge. They better be careful, because you can't do that to people. You can't do it. We have literally thousands and thousands of complaints coming in, and you just can't do that. So I think that Google and Twitter and Facebook, they're really treading on very, very troubled territory.
Search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results towards any political ideology. We continually work to improve Google search, and we never rank results to manipulate political sentiment.
Well, Google was on the mind today here at the White House. The president tweeting out this morning and then talking to the media, saying Google search results for Trump news shows only the viewing reporting of fake news media. In other words, they have it rigged for me and others so that almost all stories and news is bad. Fake CNN is prominent. Republican, conservative, and fair media shut out. Illegal. 96% of results on Trump news are from national left-wing media. Very dangerous. Google and others are suppressing voices of conservatives and hiding information and news that is good. They are controlling what we can and cannot see. This is a very serious situation, will be addressed. We'll start there with our panel. Byron York, chief political correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief at USA Today. And Molly Hemingway, senior editor at the Federalist. Susan, your initial thoughts on this?
Well, you know, I think the problem that President Trump is seeing when he Googles his own name is that mainstream news sources and sources that are often linked by a lot of people come up first in the search. So it's not like left-wing news sources. It's the mainstream news sources that people rely on. The analysis by a group, a conservative group that took fault with the algorithm that Google uses, ranked USA Today as a left-wing news source, and I can tell you that that is not accurate.
Molly.
Well, in the same way that you shouldn't just take what President Trump is saying about Google News and how they rank things as the gospel truth, neither should you accept Google's denials, particularly when you have this history of Google admitting that they de-rank based on their own conceptions, editorial conceptions. You have examples of them censoring in other countries. You have them dealing with a lawsuit in their own company, dealing with their extreme left-wing bias, and they fired employees who were too conservative. You have Eric Schmidt admitting that de-ranking is used to help out some search results over others. We have a piece up at the Federalist that shows that someone who has appeared on Fox News and CNN, he has evidence that his Fox News appearances were devalued and his CNN appearances valued higher. So I think there's a lot more that needs to be studied about their algorithms, and particularly how, when you have a company that is employed almost exclusively progressives or liberals, how that might affect the algorithms that they create.
Yeah, obviously, as you said, Google is pushing back hard against that. Byron, you know, in the campaign, Donald Trump was listed as the most digitally savvy candidate, and his Google searches and all of his searches were tops. As your president, obviously the volume of stories dealing with a whole range of subjects increases.
Well, some of this is just Trump venting. It's part of his general pushback against the press. But conservatives really have had complaints against the big tech companies in recent years. Facebook has made a sort of outreach to conservatives, talking to them, trying to convince them that their algorithms are fair. The CEO of Twitter has basically said, yeah, we're all on the left. As far as this is concerned, it's really very, very difficult to see, to tell definitively if these algorithms are biased or what. But I do think one thing will happen here. When the tech companies are under attack, either from left or right, they will go to safety. They will start featuring the most mainstream news organizations, the New York Times, the Washington Post, which are precisely the news outlets that conservatives accuse of bias. So the problem will continue, and we will hear more complaints about this.
So down the row, Byron, Susan, Molly, do you think some regulation on Google or other companies is coming?
Oh, this is not what President Trump says is not the only example of people calling for this sort of regulation. I do think something's on the way in the next few years.
I think there will be some more regulation of the big tech companies, although not necessarily because of the complaint that President Trump levied today. There are complaints about privacy, the handling of real fake news by these big tech companies. Yes, I think there is an appetite to try to do more to regulate some aspects of this business.
Big tech companies are extremely worried about deregulation, and the answer of saying, well, private companies can do whatever they want isn't going to be sufficient for a lot of people who think that they are putting too heavy of a hand on the dial, particularly when it comes to political discussions and electoral results.
All right, we talked yesterday about the NAFTA and the Mexico situation. I want to move on to Bruce Orr, who is testifying behind closed doors on Capitol Hill today. Justice Department official at the center of that infamous Trump dossier. His wife worked for Fusion GPS. Talking to lawmakers today, here is Mark Meadows on Bruce Orr's testimony.
Not only did the FBI know that the dossier was unverified, but they also knew that there was real credibility issues where it would never end up in a courtroom. Bruce Orr worked for the Department of Justice since 1991. And never in his entire history was anything handled in the way that this was handled.
Setting that up, Meadows tweeted, "We've learned new information suggesting our suspicions are true. FBI DOJ have previously leaked info to the press and then used those same press stories as a separate source to justify FISA's unreal. Tomorrow's Bruce Orr interview is even more critical. Did he ever do this?" Molly, we're hearing he had a lot of lack of memory in this testimony, but we'll see where this goes.
We are hearing that the testimony contradicted the sworn testimony of other players in this drama. We don't know what happened because it was behind closed doors, but unfortunately that previous hearing with Peter Strzok was such a clown show that I think that people figured they needed it to be behind closed doors in order to get information that comes at the expense of transparency for the American public. What we are hearing is that he did admit that he was profiting from Fusion GPS. That was the firm that employed his wife to the tune of $44,000 while funneling information from Fusion GPS that was this Hillary Clinton concocted dossier of Russia collusion. And as people have noted, this is very unorthodox. This is not the way that people traditionally handle the investigation. He ostensibly had nothing to do with the investigation while he was funneling this information. So I think we have a lot of questions we need answered.
Yeah, Susan, what are the chances that Bruce Orr stays on at the Justice Department after all this and the president's focus?
What are the chances that Jeff Sessions stays on at the Justice Department after all this? I don't know whether Bruce Orr will stay in the Justice Department or not. And Congress certainly has a right and an obligation to pursue investigations as they see fit. But I would just note that we should remember that the dossier was not the launching point for the Russia probe. George Papadopoulos talking at a London bar to an Australian diplomat was the launching point for this investigation. I think that's a fact that we should not lose sight of.
Byron, last word.
Well, I think Representative Meadows was saying the FBI knew about these problems with Steele and the dossier, that Steele was desperate to get Donald Trump. I think he probably knew that because Bruce Orr told them. And I think that what will come out of this is that the FBI knew well about the problems with Christopher Steele and his biases, even when it first applied for a FISA warrant to spy on Carter Page.
And per our earlier conversation, the Washington Post tonight saying that the president vented twice, saying he might fire Sessions just in the past couple of weeks. We'll see where that goes. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. We're coming to you live tonight from the White House North Lawn. The president here is once again taking on news and social media. In fact, if you do a Google search on the words Trump and Google, you get results with words like rage, rigged, and conspiracy theory. President Trump is not happy with Google over what he calls suppression of conservative voices and positive news about his administration. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts has specifics tonight. Thanks for having us again.
Brett, good evening to you. Welcome to the sauna bath here in 1600 Pennsylvania. Officials from Google, Facebook, and Twitter are going to be testifying on Capitol Hill next week. The issue is foreign interference in the election, but there's certainly a few questions that President Trump would like to ask him if he had the chance.
Its corporate motto is do the right thing, but today President Trump accused Google of doing the wrong thing, of twisting search results to highlight negative stories about him and suppress conservative voices.
I think Google is really taking advantage of a lot of people, and I think that's a very serious thing, and it's a very serious charge.
The president singled out not just Google, but Facebook and Twitter, too.
You just can't do that. They're really treading on very, very troubled territory, and they have to be careful. It's not fair to large portions of the population.
The Oval Office remarks followed a morning Twitter rant where the president said it might be illegal, insisting this is a very serious situation, will be addressed. A Google search of the words Trump News yields mostly stories regarding his complaints about Google, including one that debunks his claim. But there is also a Vanity Fair article that comes up with the headline, Trump is nuts. Google denies any attempt to eliminate the positive and accentuate the negative.
Search is not used to set a political agenda, and we don't bias our results towards any political ideology.
President Trump also drew a sharp response from Mexico today. One day after cutting a new trade deal, the president said a border wall will be built and Mexico will pay for it.
The wall will be paid for very easily by Mexico. It'll ultimately be paid for by Mexico.
Mexico begged to differ. In a tweet, Mexico's foreign minister saying, "We just reached a trade understanding with the U.S. and the outlook for the relationship between our two countries is very positive. We will never pay for a wall, however. That has been absolutely clear from the very beginning." The wall dispute aside, the Mexico trade deal certainly got Canada's attention. The foreign minister came calling in Washington today after President Trump threatened a 25% tariff on Canadian-built cars if it didn't sign on to a revised NAFTA. The president's chief economic advisor denied that the White House was putting pressure on Canada and other U.S. trade allies, but freely acknowledged the ultimate goal is to twist a few arms in Beijing.
I think China is now on the defensive because they see that the USA is beginning to get some momentum, and I think that's great.
The president's Democratic critics, though, are skeptical of this deal with Mexico. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer saying, well, maybe it's something like the North Korean deal. Looks good on the surface, but very little detail, and who knows what's really going to happen, Brett?
You know, last night the president had a dinner for evangelical leaders, and there was a line in there that is catching some attention.
Yeah, there's a tape out. Somebody put out a recording. Apparently the president said something to the effect of, if Democrats take control of Congress, they will quickly and violently overturn everything that's been done. I spoke with Pastor Robert Jeffress a short time ago. He was there. He thought the president was using violent as more of a metaphor to talk about what the Democrats would do, not suggesting that there would be rioting in the streets. Jeffress himself says he was invited to come up and spoke to the crowd. He said that if Democrats take control of Congress, he believes one of two things will happen. They'll either try to throw the president out of office, or they will handcuff him and his administration so that he won't be able to get anything done for the next 2 years.
All right, John, thank you.
Thanks, Brett.